So we're going to be starting. We're just going to bless this space a bit and set the mood for the day. We want to take a moment to acknowledge the ancestors. We want to take a moment to acknowledge the spirit of goodness and of God. We want to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of community, the importance of remembering those who came before us, those who are doing the work now, and those who need our inspiration and support to do this important work in the future. We want to remember all of those who are not fortunate enough to be here with us today, who did not get some food this morning or shelter last night. We want to think of all of these people in the spirit of Dr. King and what he represented. May this day bring us peace. Amen, Ashe, and blessed be. All right. We are going to a couple of quick housekeeping. AT&T is here. If you forgot your charger for your phone, they are here to save the day. So you can get your phone charged over there. Say hi. All right. There you go. So thank you for being a campus partner with us. We are going to have our welcome from Monsignor Riley.
Good morning, and welcome to our symposium. I'm sorry that my schedule doesn't permit me to join you in person. This is a very meaningful day in the year for our campus, a day of deep reflection, enrichment, and learning. Seton Hall is proud to host this exploration of Dr. King's life and his teachings. I'm grateful to the Reverend Dr. Pritchett and everyone who helped to make today possible. True to Dr. King's legacy and Seton Hall's mission, we actively seek to live with each other in peace, to grow and to nurture one another, to guide each other to deeper faith and greater responsiveness to God's plan for our lives. We live in a nation, however, where many people and social structures are antagonistic to these ideals. I'm reminded of the late Pope Francis's message on Martin Luther King Day 1 year ago. He said, in today's world, Dr. King's dream of harmony and equality for all people, attained through peaceful means, remains ever timely. He went on to quote from his encyclical Fratelli Tutti, saying, "Each one of us is called to be an artisan of peace, by uniting and not dividing, by extinguishing hatred and not holding on to it, by opening paths of dialogue." Today at this symposium, all of you can hone your skills as artisans of peace. I hope you leave here empowered, energized, and ready to advance Dr. King's commitment to nonviolence and Seton Hall's Catholic devotion to peace, justice, and the dignity of every human person. We must hold fast to the dream and the teachings of Dr. King, to the faith of our church, and to the power of our great minds to find solutions consistent with our shared values. Despite all obstacles, I'm confident we will succeed in building a nation that upholds the promise of freedom, justice, and equality for all. Thank you. Have a wonderful day, and God bless you all.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here on this crisp day. So I'm Jonathan Farina. I am the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, which is very proud to host this traditional event every year for quite a long time now. A lot of invisible work goes into organizing holiday events like this, whether it's your family Thanksgiving or in our case an MLK Symposium. A lot of people working on the holiday because they care about you and our community, and they care about the cause. And we tend to, I think sometimes, especially at a university, subordinate this kind of work of care and organization to intellectual work. But ideas don't matter unless they're put into practice, and it takes that care to make it happen. So I want to start by just thanking my colleagues for organizing this and making today possible. First, of course, Reverend Forrest Pritchett, who imagined this event and who has kept it running for decades now. I also want to thank Ghana Hilton. Where are you, Ghana? Where'd she disappear to? Ghana, who you'll see bouncing around, she's Associate Director of the MLK Program and Director of Campus Inclusion and Business Affairs, who's kept everyone on schedule, secured the room, ordered the food, put up the signs, emailed the students, and done a lot of work to make this happen. I also want to thank our colleagues in facilities for sweeping up the snow, Assistant Provost Mary Kate Natus, TLTC for the screen behind us, GDS and Public Safety. We have a great lineup of voices today, including 4 faculty from our Interdisciplinary Africana Studies program, which is one of the oldest Africana Studies programs in the nation. Professor of History, Dr. Larry Green, Assistant Professor of Religion, Dr. Nkosi Dubois Anderson, Dr. Stephanie Harris, who is the Director of the Africana Studies program, and Visiting Professor of Political Science, Dr. Karim Almanor. They will share their expertise in history, sociology, religion, political science, and law at the intersection with the African diaspora. We will also hear from our MLK students. At Seton Hall, all undergraduates, whatever their major, read at least a little bit about the Catholic intellectual tradition, at least a little bit of philosophy, religion, history, literature, and politics. And they learn to reflect on how these readings contextualize and might transform their place in history and in the world. As I said, though, ideas only matter if they are realized and brought into action. Our academic purpose today is to underscore that connection between ideas and practice, between the classroom and caring. We are here to learn about how each of us can contribute to the work Dr. King did in our own ways. At school, of course, but also in business, in healthcare, and in our neighborhoods, wherever we find ourselves every day. Our academic purpose is to be moved to address the injustices that we see, moved to form relationships with new people to effect change. My daughter is in the middle school choir, and she told me last week that she'd be singing "We Shall Overcome" in a school assembly. And it brought me back almost 40 years now to my own assemblies in elementary school, Campbell School in Metuchen. I could see the room now and can literally hear the assembly. And it felt like a very different world back then. And it's disappointing to feel that how I felt in the 1980s back in that assembly, listening to that song, was more hopeful and more peaceful than the world that we're living in now. But that stark contrast between how I felt then in elementary school and how I feel now reminds us of the importance of every year coming back together and reminding ourselves that this work is work that has to be done over and over and over again. That it's not work that gets finished and is over, but is the work of care. Every day we need to love one another. Every day we need to work on making the world a better place. I'm also an English professor, and there's always the student who comes in and complains that, "Oh, I've read that book before." They may have, but hopefully they're a different person each time they read it. And we are a different person every time we come to MLK Day each year, and the world is a different place. And it takes that renewal of this tradition to remind ourselves to get back to work and to keep at it. So to varying degrees, we have all learned about Dr. King many times before. We have sung the songs and heard about his life, but we are here now in a new year with new political conflicts, with new classmates and co-workers, and a new opportunity to get back to work caring. Let's remind ourselves to be responsible agents of social change. Let's put our knowledge into practice. I encourage all our students especially to bring this purpose with them to all their classes this semester, to think about how they are going to apply what they learn about any subject to improve the world and the lives of others. Knowledge only matters if we put it to work, and the work of justice, friendship, love, citizenship, democracy, all the important things is never done. It's what we do every day. The challenges that affect us most may seem daunting in their scale, but all meaningful change happens and originates in small relationships between a few caring people. As it happens, Dr. King wrote his dissertation about a critique of two different concepts of God, precisely because those concepts of God did not account for God's personal interaction with individuals, a personal relationship that Dr. King thought was necessary to any idea of God and to any change in the world. Today, let us discern afresh our personal relationship to social justice and remember our responsibility to help achieve it. Change starts by genuinely listening to the people around us, especially if those people seem to disagree with us. Racial and social justice intersect with every aspect of life, from economics and politics to health, law, and culture. And students of all disciplines of study, finance, marketing, biology, history, nursing, literature, religion, have different specific ways to put Dr. King's lessons to work in their disciplines and in their careers. We are all responsible for making sure that what happens today in our conversations happens throughout the semester and throughout the year in the lives we lead. So I thank you all for being here, and I thank those again who organized it, and wish you all God bless.
Thank you, Dean Farina. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for braving the elements to get here this morning. I'm tempted just to remind us, when we started this 9 years ago, the MLK Day Symposium, it was a replacement for the pancake breakfast we had done for 30 years. And I was actually very much motivated by the election of 2016. As you think about who was running for office, many Americans voted for the candidate of their choice. There was a very clear choice, depending on your ideological orientation. Many people were thinking and hoping perhaps it might be the first time in American history that a woman may have been elected president of the United States. But after the election and subsequent types of behavior beginning to emerge on this campus, that I think, according to the Catholic intellectual tradition, we would not say was complementary to that tradition. The Spirit of God, I think, moved upon my spirit and soul. I went to the university provost, and I had a suggestion. I said, I'd like to replace my pancakes with academic credit and offer at least one credit in anti-sexism, anti-racism, anti-classism symposium. And that first year, 2019, I dedicated that symposium to the President of the United States. But unfortunately, he did not register to get the credit. I think he thought he knew everything about everything, so he didn't need to be here. But beyond that, the weather was similar to this. The Saturday before, it was probably 0 degrees, and it was snow, rain combination. It looked very bad, but they predicted the temperature would go up to 0 on Sunday and things should be clear. I only say that to say we started getting phone calls just asking if it was going to go on. Is it yes, it's just going to be very cold, travel safely if you would. We had over 300 people. And when you look at this room, I'm saying this for perspective and appreciation. This room is actually 2/3 of Bethany. There's another third behind that wall. We needed all three spaces, and indeed, this place was packed. But I say that to say that when you're doing the good thing, the right thing, the time is always right, as Dr. King and Socrates or Plato might have said. The time is always right to do the right thing. And that's the reason why we're here today. We hope that we can plant a seed in your spirit so that years from now, perhaps you will be telling someone the story and a narrative that while you sat here at Seton Hall, you heard some words which changed your paradigm tremendously, that changed your worldview, that caused you to step up and to be an element of change. Or as Gandhi would have said, be the change that you want to see in the world. Amen? I'd like to just thank Dean Farina for his continual support over the years. I want to thank our new Associate Director, Ghana Hilton, for all the work she does consistently in the area of inclusion and belonging with students. And I want to thank the tech and media staff for their conscientious stewardship over all that we attempt to do together. And I want to thank all of you, once again, all the students. I need to remind all the students who signed up for the 1 credit, just in case we can make sure you're getting the right communications and reading the right kind of messages. All of you are responsible initially to make sure you are taking copious notes. However that may be accomplished, at least we're going to have recordings, I would hope within 24 or 48 hours up on YouTube of both what we did on Friday with Dr. Jossi from Fairleigh Dickinson University and today, so that you can go back and capture those nuggets and so forth. And if you were to go up and look at, on Canvas, look at the different instructions, you have about a week to capture those notes and to turn them in. And then we have a little book for you to read on Dr. King and the Civil Rights Movement. I would like to point out in our midst today, it's more dignified by your presence of all of you. But I'd like to, thank you, Ghana. I'd like to point out that we're going to have at least 2 people who, relative to, we'll say, the history of New Jersey, are going to be rather unique. We have the Secretary Designate for the Department of Human Services, who will be probably within the next few days. You'll be sworn in. Dr. Chow, would you just stand up and wave your hands if you'd like to, sir? And I told him along the way, if he feels so motivated, if he'd like to grab the podium for a few minutes, he can feel free to do that. He has my permission. You know, back in the 60s, that ancient period, it's like the Old Testament, the 60s. Thank you for laughing, Bonnie, she got it. But nobody would hand a microphone to any student who came into a program. You give us the mic, you're not getting it back, because we had messages of liberation, and we wanted to pump people up, but I am offering you the mic. Around the middle of the day, or we'll be out of here, hopefully, God willing, between 12:30 and 1 o'clock. We're going to have some activities toward the end of the day that deal with community service. You can earn some community service credit. And in that context, I'd like to point out that in that corner, I'm going to have Gavin raises his hand. This is a 1981 graduate of Seton Hall University. Jack the Button Man is his nickname. But Jack has a mini constitution that you can actually put into your pocket and carry it wherever you go. Read it if you haven't. We all understand the general ideas behind it, but we think it's important in this day, in this age, and in this time period to see that all of us can refresh our memories. I often tell some of my classes, I ask them, if anybody in your family is recently becoming a citizen to the United States, and if so, could you please stand up and explain to the class what you have to go through, the test and so forth? Because I'm of the opinion that most of us, 90% of all Americans who lived here, have lived here, and all of your ancestors lived, most of us would flunk the test, be very honest about it. But he is there, and we have some motivational buttons. Toward the end of the day, the community service activity that we'll have available for you is packing bags to be distributed at shelters. In addition to which, we're going to have some luminaries. A luminary is going to be an electric candlelight that goes inside of a small paper bag. And what we're doing is, in conjunction with South Orange, the Coalition on Race, at 5 o'clock today, there's going to be a luminary where they ask everyone in honor of Dr. King to put this lighted luminary at the edge of your driveway and walkway. So we're saying take it if you're going back home to your dorm, and later today at 5, light it. We're also we'll have some markers in the bag so that you can mark a message of peace and love on it. And take pride when people ask you why and what are you doing, please explain it to them in the spirit of Dr. King's life. One other comment I'm going to make before I begin to move into my formal presentations. The price of freedom is not free at all. I want to point out to you, Dr. King was really a very young man, but he never lived to see the age of 40. He did understand that when you begin to speak up and you talk about bringing light to a dark space, over 400 years of oppression of at least one race of people, and then one sex, sexism, racism, classism, or power and privilege coming through our organized religion. Then we have a lot of work to do for those who think we can make this world and this country a better place. But in March, for example, when it comes to looking at martyrs through the University Core program, we take the time to identify two martyrs, one of the Catholic faith, one of the Protestant faith, Oscar Romero from South America, and Dr. King's. I believe it's the 28th, is it, of March, approximately, given whatever, that was his assassination, 24th. He spoke up on behalf of tyranny against the classes of people in South America, as did Dr. King here. So we take the 8 to 10, 11-day period, depending on when we are on the campus, and we will do in the public arena probably a tent in the center on the green, and we will read the words of these two men. We start with Romero, and we will end the vigil a week and a half later, dedicating ourselves to Dr. King. I would also like to point out, in terms of notables, that, and I think Dr. Farina referred to this, the MLK program was started here at this university within 2 years of his assassination, 1970. So according to the King family, and we've had a number of them to come and speak at the university, we are one of the, if not the oldest program in the nation committed to his works and his life. And similarly, as Dr. Farina mentioned, Seton Hall was the first university in the state of New Jersey and one of the first in the nation to start a full Black Studies Center at that point in time. So without further ado, I just need to ask my peeps, do I need to push anything, or are you guys going to push it in there? Okay, gotcha. All right, so we're going to start off with, I'll be doing several different segments. We're going to be looking at different quotes from Dr. King, particularly as it relates to this year being the 250th birthday and celebration, if you would, of the United States of America. I think more formal activities will be occurring around the July the 4th holiday, but I thought it would be a challenge for all of us to look at America and its contextualization of how it started, the ideas behind it, and so forth. So without further ado, let us move forward. So we're going to be isolating these comments to specifically things Dr. King said about the United States of America. There will be 4 categories involved. You can see them on the screens, I hope. So the first category, in looking at America, that we need to understand that according to the Bible, any behavior which is not glorifying of God probably falls into the category of sin. Jim Wallace, who's a theologian, several years ago produced the following volume, and I hope you can see the small print that is right above the Edmunds Pettus Bridge. When that march occurred, it was March, 2 months before I graduated with my bachelor's degree. And that's the only thing that prevented me from going down. It was that I was trying to stay on task and be the first person in the family to get a bachelor's degree. But the quote Our nation was born in the genocide when it embraced the doctrine that the original American, although they didn't call themselves American, and they didn't call themselves Indians, but indeed we called them Indians, was an inferior race. That's a direct quote. When Barack Obama was president, I actually, through my ministerial credentials, attempted to convince him of a kind of a robust idea. And the idea was, I thought America, one of the presidents ought to declare a day or a week or a month of repentance for the sins that we do that many would look at from one angle and say, this brings about our greatness. From another angle, a theological angle, I thought repentance will never be all we could be if we think we are all of that now, unless we apologize to God for the way in which we have treated the indigenous people of North America, the way we treated people of African descent, the way we denied rights to 50% of the population, the female population. I had students back in 1991 when I indicated, I said, what major anniversary is this? It's the 100th anniversary of some special event. Very few of them realized that it was the 100th anniversary of the women getting the right to vote in America. And actually, when some students heard that, some of the women said, women always had the right to vote. And I said, that is a false narrative, and please check it out. Next quote. When Dr. King gave his infamous speech the night before his assassination, one of the first words and lines out of his mouth was, all we say to America, because at that point in time, he had been accused of all kinds of things. He was being accused by the FBI of being unfaithful to his wife. He was accused of being a communist. Do you know that the FBI actually infiltrated? He was going to speak at his alma mater. Can somebody in the room tell me what was Dr. King's undergraduate alma mater? I'm going to make this as interactive. Morehouse. Do you know members of the government actually infiltrated his fraternity? And when they told the members that he was really a communist, he wasn't really a good American. And when he went to Morehouse to speak the first time, Alpha Phi Alpha stood outside of that auditorium and picketed against Dr. King. So I'm saying that as a moral lesson. Young people in this room, you got to know what you stand for, because if you don't, you will fall for anything. Quote me on that. If you don't know what you stand for in life, you can be manipulated and used by anyone. But Dr. King went on to say that night, April the 3rd, all we say to you, America, is to be true to what you said on paper. So here we have that line that emphasizes the fact, in the language of that period, all men, and we could say all women, should be created equal. As we look at what we call the American promise, when the architects of our republic wrote the words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they signed, as Dr. King said, a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir, which means we were to inherit from that note. And he goes on to say, I criticize America because I love her and because I want to see her stand as the moral example for the whole world. In the present period, it looks like we're trying to stand as the giant that all others will be knocked down by if you're not in compliance with what we want. Many of us have lived through that period back in the 50s, maybe in the 70s again. We don't need to bully the world. God has blessed us so that we can really help others to grow. There are two Americas. One is overflowing with milk and prosperity. This America is the habitat of millions of people, and they have a lot of food and freedom. But the other half is wanting. The book that appears there really influenced my generation. It came out in the late 60s. It was called The Other America, and it was something that really helped to solidify for many of us our thoughts on social change. Now we're going to look briefly at his comments, looking at the power of science versus the character of people. And his quote is, "Our scientific power has outrun our spiritual power. We have guided missiles and misguided men." And this chart looks as in comparison over a period of time. It looks at the nuclear development capacities of both the Russians and the United States. My generation, when we were in elementary school in the 50s, periodically they would practice air raid drills in which we were told that the Russians, we had to get ready because the Russians were about to invade the United States, much like they're invading Ukraine today, and that they would have nuclear bombs. So the children, we were all told, please crawl under your wooden desk, and when the bomb drops, you will be perfectly protected. When you hear the air raid siren go off again, children, you may get back into your seat and face your teachers. The reality was we all would have been turned to dust had there been those explosions. Very fascinating point. We are applying this, we say, after his death, but King said on one occasion, we should never forget that everything Adolf Hitler did in Germany was actually legal. I think that applies, as I say here. Here's a comment on America in the year 2025. So think back on what occupied a lot of our thoughts in 2025. And here's a newspaper article in which an American scientist is actually indicating that Hitler was approving of a certain plan in Germany at the time. As a matter of fact, one example would be something like this. We had states that were highly influenced by the ideology called eugenics, which means how to bring about racial purification and racial superiority. California had a law that dealt with people who were born and who had below average IQs. I think in the law, many of the laws stated that people with low IQs, or if they were that lower to be mentally deficient, were not allowed to marry each other. Hitler actually had his staff people order all the documents from California so that they could model some of the policies and procedures that they wanted to put in place. That's an unknown piece of history that many people are totally unaware of. There is an interface between the horrendous policies that emerged out of the National Socialist Party, better known as the Nazi Party, and the American ideological system. Here's Dr. King's quote on fundamentally Sundays at 11 o'clock. We must face the sad fact that at 11 o'clock on Sunday morning, when we stand to sing, "In Christ there is no east or west," we stand in the most segregated hour of America. 11 o'clock on Sunday mornings is the most segregated hour in American history. Just think about that as we move into our houses of sanctuary and worship. Our final points and takeaways from looking at those quotes: that in order to honor King, let us all commit ourselves, if you can handle it, to engage in transformative change. Let's become the advocates for justice and equality. Let's also educate those around us, perhaps even starting with our own families. Let's have periods of reflection. And let's begin to take action in our daily lives. I'm going to just pause for a minute. Would anyone like to ask a question? Anybody like to make a comment, have a reaction before we move on? Yes, ma'am.
Why did you say you can handle it? You prefaced that with...
Sometimes it gets very hot in the kitchen. I think many families actually this past Thanksgiving after the election we would understand that handling, when you get all of their family coming in with diverse, different backgrounds, different ideologies, and so sometimes the heat can get pretty high. I just thought I'd give that this, we know that everybody can't handle it. There's no shame in that. But, take part in some of the empowerment and capacity building things we do at Seton Hall. So when you leave here, you're equipped. Thank you. So let me see, I'll keep pushing my buttons. Okay. I'm now going to, how many of you in the room are aspiring to be lawyers one day? All sitting at one table? See one there, thank you, got 5. Okay, 2 more of you, thank you. All right, so pay attention. I could ask one of you, what in a sentence, what is the function of the law? Since you want to be lawyers, what's the function? Who was the answer to that? What is the function of the law? Anybody want to try that? Anybody? Yes. Speak nice and loud. I don't think we have a mic on the floor.
To create guidelines for society and law, and then to hold them accountable to them.
Okay, so society's laws and to hold them accountable. Okay, so we'll get a runner. Okay, so I'm taking the liberty at this point to really show you how also it has been discovered by scholars that indeed the law also, they have discovered, or probably have known all along, that I could say the law is two-faced. Now that sounds like something off of a date, but that the law can have many functions. It can have what I call, as a sociologist, it can have a manifest function, which is what is written on the paper. Then there's a latent function, which means once it goes into operation, some things begin to happen that weren't intended by what was written on the paper. And that's what we're going to take a look at, because many legal scholars have determined that indeed the African American population, the black population, the colored people have been the victims of such a situation. Forgive that, but it's simply what we're looking at really are 4 centuries of work. We think about the first colony founded by the English. Would anyone like to say where was that colony located? The first colony, the first ship that arrived from England, the first English-speaking colony was in what state, and what was the name of it? Yes, sir.
Jamestown, Virginia.
Jamestown, Virginia. Thank you so much. Actually, and that you know the approximate date? Just approximately.
1609.
We're close enough. It was like 1606. You pass, no problem. Indeed. So right at the beginning, almost of the 17th century, and here now we're into the 21st century. But all that really is on that slide. We're looking at 4 centuries of exposure. And then in bold print, we then highlight how indirectly those laws would have influenced the emergence of to control the behavior of African Americans. Although we weren't really called African Americans, we were probably just called boy and girl. Even our names were not being respected. So, at some point in time in the 1940s, the American social science establishment decided that somebody needed to do an overall study of race relations in this country, because no one had ever done any serious work. And the social science community literally came to the conclusion through the Carnegie Foundation that indeed there were no American scientists that could actually be trusted to do an objective job in this work. Does anybody ever heard the name Gunnar Myrdal before? Sorry, I cut off his last part of his name. I didn't realize that. Does anybody know where Gunnar Myrdal is from? He is a Swedish social economist. He was brought in as an objective outsider to actually study race relations in this country, thinking he would be rather neutral or objective. So the subtitle of his work, when he finished it, I think it was probably the Carnegie Foundation that may have paid for this. He called it The Negro Problem and Modern Democracy. And that's just a close-up of him. That second bullet point really hits the central concept that we can take away from his works, and that was that indeed there is an American dilemma, and that dilemma exists between the creed and the deed. The creed would be the American documents that talk about freedom and the Constitution and your rights, and the deed being the way people of African descent have been treated. Simple thesis. There's a difference, he said, between the creed and the deed. Other social scientists by the 60s and 70s began to then codify the social psychological impact of that difference between the creed and the deed, and they actually give it the terminology, important here, specifically of anti-blackness, which means that anything that has to do with these people from Africa, the dominant population, but not all of the dominant population, but they like to create the ideology that nothing is going to be appreciated. So I often tell my students a story to say, when you look in the mirror in the morning as you're prepping to leave the house, how do you feel about what you see in the mirror? I said, because in all honesty, in the 1950s, when I'm becoming a teenager, I would look in the mirror and really I didn't like what I saw. I said, it wasn't because of any pimples breaking out on my face. I didn't like the texture of my hair, didn't like the size of my nose, didn't like my skin color. And then I had to realize, like many in my generation, that I wasn't really evaluating myself, that I was thinking through the type of indoctrination that our people had experienced for generation after generation. And I then decided to, minor in social psychology so that I could learn more about the psychology of personality development, because we had to get the other out of our heads if we were going to be making any progress. Now, other researchers in the 20th century have begun to look at the role of race and the law. Here is Dr. Sharcy McIntyre in the cover of her book, which was also her doctoral dissertation work, and it was entitled "The Process: the Criminalization of a Race." It says, "Free blacks during slavery," and fundamentally her thesis was that the establishment conspired to make sure that any African Americans or those who had formerly been in bondage, once they got their freedom, they wanted to make sure that they could hook them again with some type of, violation of some local laws. Now, we're going to have a presentation a little bit later today from Dr. Carmel Almanor, who is a political scientist and a lawyer, double degreed, who may be going into this concept. But I want to point out some of the violations might have been, and depending on the colonial community that I'm walking through. If I were walking on a small sidewalk and a white person were approaching me, it would be my social responsibility to step off of the curb into the street to let the white person pass. If not, a policeman could be summoned to arrest me. If I could be accused of looking a white person in the eyeball, and I want to say, God bless you. That could also it was against the law in many communities for you to even look a white person in the face. Just think about that as I modify. I'm not going to go into all the details. Another jurist, a judge, Judge Leon Hittenbogen, the Federal Circuit Court judge out of Philadelphia, at some point where he realized that no one in legal backgrounds were even looking at this issue, he went into all of his text materials, which I guess if you went to law school and you had one shelf, that that line of books would go from this point probably over to that wall. That's how many books you probably would have to complete to get out of law school. In today's world, you probably give them $1,000 and they give you a disc, I would imagine, with all of that on it. He went into all of his books and started codifying all of the laws during the colonial period also had been written to hold the Negro population in their place. He found over 10,000 such rules and laws. So then we can then say the African American population is the only group in America who had laws written to retard and to hold them in their place. Think about that. All laws should be written to help us to prosper and to give us certain rights. But we are the only group for which thousands of laws have been written to hold people in their place. This stream of thought is picked up by another Harvard professor, Derek Bell, who many years ago I came across this book and read it. Then I designed a course for the social work department called Social Problems and Social Policies. But I just pause without going into more comment to say you can make note of the title. This has now become a classic work in that era. And from all of that, critical race theory is what they now call it in law schools. Many law schools believe that it is inappropriate for all law students to simply assume that all the law helps to protect and provide rights, that the law, historically in America, law has also been used to retard the progress of the African American population, and the law has been used to retard, in many cases, I would imagine, the progress of females. That's why the period of the 1960s and the early 70s in the areas of civil rights laws became so important. Any questions from anyone briefly on the ideas of law and how law was used? Yes?
Hi, you mentioned that you felt that African Americans or blacks were the only group that was really codified that way to be held down. Is it really
Historically, yes.
or I mean in the U.S., or is it just the one that had the largest abundance of laws? Because it seemed like they were very similar laws
In
others like indigenous people.
No, we are referring to the American context. Yeah, and then oh yes, we would need another whole day to look at the struggle of the indigenous nations of the country. As a matter of fact, one other little, I may have it in here. Does anybody know, we have 50 states in the United States? How many states did the indigenous people of North America live in? Because it would be all of them. How many were they? Since we named the states, what did the indigenous population call them? But I'm saying, how many were there? In other words, the question is, how many indigenous nations did we have? We had, like, I'm New Jerseyan, Pennsylvanian, New York. Most of us don't know that until you. In North America, there were 500 tribal nations in the same territory that we occupy today. Over 500. So when these folks talk about Washington Redskins and Cleveland Indians and the insults involved, and we just look at our hot dogs and hamburgers that we want to eat as we sit in the stadium, oh, there is so much that we all need to be exposed to. I'm going to be wrapping this up by just looking very briefly overall at the impact of the MLK program here at Seton Hall University. Here's what we looked like at graduation just a couple of years ago. A proud community of servant leaders based upon biblical scripture. Our average for the last 20 years or more, the average GPA at graduation for our classes is 3.5. We are formed as a historical society. 1970, we mentioned that. And we have, lots of our students who have earned their terminal degrees. MDs, JDs, EDDs, PhDs, et cetera, et cetera. I say that for just a brief exposure. We also offer another course for 3 credits called the MLK Honors Seminar at the university. We have this 1 credit course. Several years ago, in Core 1101, the first core course, Dr. King's Mountaintop Speech was incorporated. Work on African saints is involved in Core 2101. During the Academic Expo held the last week in April, we have various students coming in from courses that we also sponsor called Peoples and the Cultures of America. And we also have another symposium during Academic Expo in honor of Nelson Mandela and Dr. King. We have had Yolanda and Bernice King, the daughters of Dr. King, speak. And one year, our students thought it would be great if Mahatma Gandhi had any children or any family members who are within any, any closeness to America, that if we could bring them here. And indeed, the grandson of Gandhi appeared here at the university a number of years ago. The students thought it'd be great, they wanted to bring him in during the daytime. I suggested that we actually bring him in during the weekend. I said, because while we will pull a large audience, perhaps, I think the Indian American community would be so grateful if they had access to this person. And we did it on the weekend, and I tell all of you who work here, we filled up Jubilee Hall on a Friday night. Okay, I'm going to ask, are there any other questions? Because I'm about to have our MLK scholars come up. And they're going to introduce themselves once they get acclimated, so just advance this until you get to your presentation. Okay, and so forth. Thank you. But then tell them your year, major, where you're from. Part of our training, every Friday, for an hour and a half, all of our freshmen, first-year scholars meet, and they do many things. One of which is that they all work in small groups. They will pick social justice issues from around the world. They'll look at who's responded to it, and we tell them that we hold them accountable by putting them into the public square to do their presentations. So we have a few of them who are with us today.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks. I'm excited to be here today. My name is Jeremy Hawthorne. I'm a freshman in the MLK Scholars Program. I'm in the International School of International Relations and Diplomacy in the 3+3 program, hoping to get a BSJD within the next 6 years. I'm from Orange, New Jersey, and thanks for having us today.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming out here today. My name is Lamine Golafali. I am also a freshman, and I am studying political science, and I'm from Mount Olive, New Jersey, and I'm so excited to talk about this topic today. So me and Jeremy, we are focusing on Black leaders abroad, and specifically, we're going to be talking about 2 leaders of one country, Burkina Faso. And the reason we picked this country is because these 2 leaders we're going to be focusing on today, they really embody some of the messaging of Dr. King, focusing on social reform and serving the everyday person, and we feel we can learn a lot from these 2 leaders. So we're going to go right into it. All right. So Burkina Faso originally was known as Upper Volta. It started out as a French colony, and I believe the colony was established sometime in the early 20th century, and they only became independent in 1960. But the first presidency was really corrupt. The president refused to hold open elections, and for 6 years there was a period of instability and political violence, ultimately leading to a coup d'etat led by Thomas Sankara. So Tomas Sankara is often known as the Che Guevara of West Africa for many reasons. He focused on reform for women, banning practices such as genital mutilation, polygamy, and expanding divorce rights for women as well. He also focused on moving away from the West and becoming self-sufficient. And the best way we really can describe his policy is in this famous declaration. He who feeds you controls you. We must dare to invent the future. So Sankara's policy really focused on self-reliance. Before, when Burkina Faso was under French control, they were exploited a lot for the resources, and they had all this land and all this agriculture, but they were seeing none of it. The people were hungry, literacy rates were low, and all they were getting out of it was exploitation from colonial powers. When Sankara came in, he helped Burkina Faso control their own destiny, and ultimately, they saw one of the greatest comebacks in West Africa. Burkina Faso agricultural outputs were some of the best in the region. Their literacy rates were able to skyrocket, and through organized reform and working together to benefit the people, Sankara really shows us how all it takes is one inspired leader to lead a revolution. So unfortunately, Sankara would be assassinated in 1987 as a result of a coup from his actual former friend who helped them overthrow the original president. And there's a lot of historical evidence that this coup was actually backed by France, because a lot of Sankara's efforts obviously hindered the capital profits of many French companies. And he would be ousted, and a new president would be installed, and he would rule until 2014. And that leads us into our second leader of today.
Hello again, everyone. We wanted to compare Mr. Sankara to his modern-day counterpart, Ibrahim Traoré, who is the current leader of Burkina Faso. He became the interim president in 2022 after leading a coup d'etat against the regime that had been in power for a number of years, and immediately took center stage as pretty much one of the most vocal voices of anti-colonialism and anti-neocolonialism in Africa. He left the Economic Commission of West African States and became one of the first real leaders to completely ban and kick out Western powers out of his country. Even though they weren't a colony anymore, Burkina Faso still had a lot of military ties to France as well as the United States, and he forced them to leave the country after taking power. He's also become the youngest head of state of an African country. He has been criticized, though, for some restrictions to media, allegations of gold mismanagement, as well as the suspension of elections, as even though he is the interim president, he has still been in power since 2022. This is a very important movement to think about today because it kind of reflects a change in Africa and the way that African politics is shaping up on the geopolitical stage as the anti-West sentiment is propagating, especially in the Sahel states, which is the highlighted region on the screen. Not only Burkina Faso, but other countries such as Mali and Niger have also had coups d'etats, and those countries, which were also former French colonies, have also kicked the French out, which is causing a rise of just anti-colonial sentiment in Africa in the 2020s. We also wanted to just quickly mention a little kind of comparison between the two leaders, between Sankara and Traoré. They're both leaders that were Pan-Africanists who believe that cooperation between African peoples and African countries was necessary for the continent as a whole to grow in its wealth for its own people, rather than relying on and being subject to the persecution and control of Western powers. However, Sankara focused more on self-reliance, while Traoré has been criticized for potentially allying with other countries, such as Russia and China, for arms deals, and also increasing his political influence. And I think it's important to set a word of warning that just because it's not a Western power doesn't mean you can't be subject to the same pressures of the colonial era. So I think it's just important to compare the two for, both of them did very good things, but there's a bit of hesitancy with and waiting to see how it turns out in the future. Thank you. Anybody have any questions for us? Yes, you, sir.
Yeah, so one of the justifications for colonialism seems to be the idea that you bring stability to a country or a region that would otherwise be very unstable. Given the number of coups d'etats that you mentioned Burkina Faso has gone through in its history, can't that be used to sort of justify by some people that desire for our colonialist government?
You want to take this or should I?
Yeah, sure. So we feel like the numbers of coups that have happened in Burkina Faso are more of evidence that there isn't really stability under colonization. It shows that even though there is a government put in power that has European military and keeping things technically stable, for the everyday person, nothing really is changing. And we feel like each coup is just another example that the citizens are fed up with colonialization. And it shows that there isn't really any ethical or possible way for people to be controlled by another foreign nation and be happy about it. And it shows that every person has that inherent desire to be free and have human dignity.
Just to build on that as well, I don't think that the idea that stability from another country should be an idea that trumps the idea of sovereignty. These are independent nations with independent people who should not be controlled by a foreign power with its own agenda. A lot of these coups d'etats and instability, not just in Burkina Faso, but in the region, is a direct result of the influence of colonial powers destabilizing and taking control of a country and its resources. And a lot of the corruption that has transpired is kind of just a latent result of the influence of those powers. So these nations need to be able to determine their own future regardless of the justifications of a Western power.
We have time for one more question, and I don't mind coming over with the mic if you have one so that the whole room can hear you. Just a little bit easier for everyone to hear you. All right, and get my steps in.
Good morning and excellent presentation. Do you think it's safe to say that in the economy that they are in today, that the term coup should be eliminated? And when it comes to what Traore is doing now with his people, and the word revolutionary would be better, or revolution?
Yeah, I'll take it. Honestly, I think what you said is a really great point. Because even going back, we refer to Sankara's revolution. They also refer to it as a coup. And just going back to the point we had before, a lot of the time, this is really just a natural reaction. When we look at the American Revolution and the colonies, they were under tyranny. They didn't call it a coup d'etat when they revolted and took their sovereignty because it was deserved. They were under a corrupt system and they wanted to enact change. And I think we often see with many African and other developing nations, terms like coup or military uprising are often used. But just going before, the president that was there before Traore's reign was someone who assassinated Sankara. Nobody actually liked them. There weren't fair elections. And you're right, using words such as coup is unfair, because when we compare it to other countries, we refer to as the French Revolution, not the French coup, even though they beheaded their own king in such a violent manner, but we refer to it as a glorious uprising of democracy. And honestly, I feel like your question really highlights the disparity about how we report on some of these events when they aren't from a Anglo or European country. So I really thank you for your question, because I think that really I'm really gonna think about how we word things going on, because that really is true. It isn't a coup, it was a revolution, as you put it, and we really hope that Burkina Faso continues to thrive.
Yes, thank you, sir, for highlighting the double standards that exist, and it's something that our organization seeks to kind of work and change.
Wonderful presentation. Please give our first set of students a hand. They did an excellent job, and we have another group that'll be coming up. Wonderful.
Yeah, it's just before these. Keep going.
Because this was a different groups.
So do you have your slides? These are the only two slides.
Yes, I do.
Do you have a computer? Do you have
Yeah, I brought my laptop.
Good.
While the students set up, we have a few more treats in the back and more hot chocolate that GDS donated. So thank you, GDS. If you would like some hot chocolate, please help yourself.
Yeah, as long as you can present, then that's fine. This will just show up.
Awesome. I'm not sure, but we're gonna take it.
Good.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much. Okay. Yeah, I guess it's okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad I have it.
I did not know the hot chocolate would be so popular. Well, my goodness. All right, we're just going to give you all a minute to get back to your seats, and we can begin.
Just give me 1 second here.
Is there also a charger available? Because I know my laptop's a little bit loud.
Let me just see something. I might be able to get this. Just give me 1 second.
It's kind of unfortunate. It's kind of like this. Yeah, like the girls from our business because then it's gonna be like, oh, like, why'd you do this? I feel like it's just, you know, personal. It's important to. Thank you. Because it's important to.
You can get that?
I don't know if the audio is gonna work since it's on the laptop. It should be on the export. Yeah, there we go. Do you know if audio will work or?
Yeah, as long as you have a video.
Yes, I do.
Yeah,
if
it's
you wanna do it in video.
Where is the video? Like, on which slide?
A little later in the presentation. It's like embedded though, so it should be able to just. Or actually, oh no, we took it. Yeah, I took it out. We're good.
Okay.
We're good. All right. Yeah,
All right.
just so we can save time. Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, in the interest of time, we are going to get started again. So if you're still getting your hot chocolate and your treat, that is fine, but can we just give our full attention to the next student presentation, please? All right, ladies, the room is yours.
Thank you. All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm so excited to be here with you today. My name is Aubrey. I'm a freshman as well. I am a business student in the 3+3 law program. If you'd like to go ahead.
Hello, everyone. I'm Mary Gail Smith. I'm also a freshman in the MLKSA program. I am a diplomacy and international relations major, also in the 3+3 law program.
Hello, my name is Logan Warren. I'm a bio major, dental, hoping to be an orthodontist, and I'm also a freshman. Thank you.
And so today we're going to be talking about the CSA Plating movement. It's about Latino civil rights. And I just wanted to go through real quick our team roles. So we have Mary Gail speaking about labor and civil rights. Logan will be speaking about present day. And then I will be speaking about MLK in relation to Cesar Chavez and also the history of the movement. All right, so the CSA Plating movement, which means yes, it can be done, emerged in the 1960s, the 1970s for Chicano farm workers, and the movement was popularized by Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta, and the United Farm Workers as well. During the labor strikes and civil rights organizing became a broader slogan for the Latino political empowerment and social justice. And then, so regarding MLK's relation to the CSA Plating movement, when you think about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., we often think about the civil rights movement in terms of marches in the South and the call for equality, nonviolence, and moral courage in the face of oppression. But King's legacy did not end there. His message of peaceful resistance and human dignity inspired people far beyond the Black freedom movement, including Cesar Chavez. So Chavez deeply admired Dr. King's philosophy of nonviolence. While most labor disputes at the time relied on strikes and confrontations, Chavez modeled his tactics after King's through the organizing of peaceful boycotts and pickets. And if you're not familiar with the term pickets, they're a form of protest in which you just stand outside of like a business or establishment. And he also participated in marches as well. The United Farm Workers movement became a voice for agricultural workers who had long been ignored. They didn't just demand better pay, they demanded dignity. They showed up to shareholder meetings, marched 340 miles from Delano to Sacramento, and picked stores that sold non-union grapes and lettuce, echoing King's belief that justice must be pursued through peaceful yet powerful action. And so in 1966, Dr. King sent Chavez a telegram saying, "Our separate struggles are really one, a struggle for freedom, for dignity, and for humanity." King praised the farm workers' commitment to righting the grievous wrongs forced upon exploited people, reminding them that their fight was part of the same broader struggle for justice and united oppressed communities everywhere. He fasted for 25 days to reaffirm his commitment to nonviolence and faith-based activism, and his efforts forged alliances with Black activists, including the Black Panther Party, leaders like Ralph Abernathy, one of King's closest allies as well. As Chavez himself said, "Our belief is to help everyone, not just one race. Humanity is our belief." From "We shall overcome" to "Si se puede" to "Yes, we can," the message is the same. It's a call to solidarity, to shared purpose, to faith that nonviolence and courage can transform injustice.
Hello, I'm going to be focusing on the connection between Dr. King and the Si se puede movement and how they both drew on similar nonviolent protest strategies and shared a deep commitment to affirming the dignity of workers. The Si se puede movement used various peaceful protest tactics such as labor unions, fasting, and boycotting, similar to Martin Luther King Jr. and his commitment to nonviolent resistance. In Dr. King's collection, All Labor Has Dignity, which brings together his speeches on economic rights and labor rights, we can see clear parallels between his goals and the objectives of the Si Se Puede movement. The All Labor Has Dignity speech that gives the book its title was delivered in 1968 in Memphis, Tennessee, to sanitation workers on strike. King emphasized that economic justice was a vital part of the civil rights struggle, reminding people that every job has moral worth. He said, "You are demanding that this city will respect the dignity of labor. Whenever you are engaged in work that serves humanity and is for the building of humanity, it has dignity and it has worth." Like the Si Se Puede organizers, King fought for fair pay, union rights, and safe working conditions, connecting the fight for labor justice with the broader movement for equality and human dignity.
Knowing the importance of the Si Se Puede movement for the Latino civil rights, it is also important to know where we stand today. For more context, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, also known as ICE, was created after the tragedy of 9/11 in hopes of strengthening and safety and national security. In more recent decades, the power ICE held only continues to grow as a result of the increase in power. It questions the true intentions ICE actions has of human rights. Is it for security, or does it have a double meaning? As of September 8th, Nadine Yosef and Enrique Morris, two BBC News journalists, report on the Supreme Court's actions to lift lower courts' restrictions on ICE. What does this mean? Agents can now stop individuals based on race, language, and a job. For example, what would you do if you were stopped while walking to your job because agents deemed you were suspicious for your skin color because you're in a highly dominated area? Or you're walking with your friends and you get stopped because of your accent that is deemed probable for suspicion. This opens doors for more racial profiling of Latinos and Spanish-speaking communities based on the language and appearance alone. This is what many immigrants feel, and if you're talking historically, people of color feel being judged or deemed suspicious for just living. Alicia Rodriguez, a postdoctoral fellow in the School of Education at University of California, wrote Latinos Education, Latinos Movement, about the long struggle for equality for Latinos population and how the U.S. policies make them small. Rodriguez spoke about how America tries to strip young students of everything human, including their language. Like Rodriguez, many Latino leaders advocate for the erasure of Latino identities and suppressing our representation, voices, and lives here in the U.S., only to continue to grow. The Supreme Court decides alone, allowing more mischaracterization, violence, and mistreatment of Latinos been seen as accepted or permitted in hopes of creating a safer world, a world that does not include Latinos. The idea MLK voiced and the dreams he had for all people only seem to regress, and this goes without saying. Latinos belong in this dream of acceptance and equality. It is also important to dedicate and honor the lives of those lost by ICE. Only a few days ago, Renee Nicole Good, a 37-year-old American citizen and a mother of 3, was shot by ICE while in her vehicle. She had just dropped off her 6-year-old son at school. When approached, Renee started reversing the car that an ICE agent pulled out his firearm and shot into her vehicle. Currently, multiple federal laws enforced, and President Trump justified this as self-defense because she weaponized her vehicle, despite the video of her shooting disproves otherwise. I believe it is important to note the many tragic lives that was lost who pose their intention of keeping the U.S. safe. These individuals listed are brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers, grandparents, students, cousins, nephews, and family, with more deadly forces only increasing. It is important to speak out about the injustice and tragedy that is taking more and more lives. With the importance of the Si Se Puede movement and the meaning the movement has, King deeply voiced his vision for the future, where freedom and equality would prevail and where we would accept one another no matter the background, race, or ethnicity. This struggle King voiced about still echoes today, and the promised land King witnessed and fought for must continue, where a society welcomes and accepts those seeking safety and acceptance to look at one another growth, compassion and unity, not difference. As a Latino, civil rights continues to be fought for. We must continue to challenge injustice and mistreatments against others. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask.
While I wait to see if there's questions, don't forget we have AT&T here if you need to charge your phone or come over and chat.
That was a really excellent presentation. Thank you so much. I think this topic of immigration is hugely important, and there's just an interesting history here with going back to Cesar Chavez, and there's just like so many people who in our workforce are immigrants, and just the respect that he was trying to gain for them goes to the respect that they need to have now. And I just wanted to ask, because I know something about the history with Monsignor Fay, who was the president of Seton Hall in the 70s. He had some connections with Cesar Chavez. Do you know it? Did you get into that at all?
This wasn't something that we particularly focused on in our research. We more so focused on the relation between MLK and Cesar Chavez, but that is very interesting and something I'd like to look into in the future.
Great job. Just a question. You both talked about how King and Chavez utilize the fast. Can you talk about sort of what you learned, or like I guess the connection between fasting and change and justice and those things? So just like the physical fast or fasting from things.
I think it's important in nonviolent protest because it's a way of utilizing your body to protest for what you find important. It's denying yourself something in order to hopefully build something else or gain some sort of traction in your community. So that's what I feel with fasting and between the Dr. King and the Si Se Puede movement.
Thank you so much, ladies. Give our students a big hand. That was a wonderful presentation. Excellent job. We're just going to change to our first panel. So if you needed to run out quickly, this would be the time, but come on up, gentlemen. Get yourself situated. You have your water that I gave you? All right, excellent.
I'd just like, while we're making the transition, I'd just like to point out to everyone that you're looking at history on the stage, because Larry Green actually, I think 2 or 3 years ago, was honored by our Human Resources Office every 5 to 10 years as they mark your various anniversaries. And Dr. Green, who will be speaking first, I believe, hit 50 years of employment here at Seton Hall, so let's give him a round of applause. And he's kind of like our senior statesman among faculty. Yes?
Okay, thank you. Very Reverend Dr. Pritchett, and thank you all for coming out for this Martin Luther King Symposium. I'll just open with an interesting book I've just finished reading, Jason Hanley's book, Erasing History. And the subtitle is so interesting, How Authoritarians Erase History to Distort the Past and to Control the Future. History is under attack, I might add, because some people do not want to have a factual, intellectual, academic history of the past, but would rather engage in romanticized mythology. We're not going to do that today. Okay. The African American Civil Rights Movement is, in effect, not simply the movement of the 1950s and 60s, but the entire sweep of African American history from the colonial era to the present is, in fact, a quest for civil rights and equality. You cannot pick a decade or a century in which that has not been the focus. So I think okay. So I'm going to talk about the early period. Although I love to talk about the 19th, 20th, and 21st century, I'm going to talk about the early period today. African Americans, American Revolution, and Emancipation. This is a historical marker in Perth Amboy, New Jersey, which is a World Heritage historical site, and it's located in the Ferry Slip area of Perth Amboy. Perth Amboy was a major slave importation port in the latter part of the 17th century, the late 1600s, and, well, even earlier, 1600s and 1700s, okay? And how did that happen? It's important to know that slavery in America, particularly in colonial America, was not simply in the South, it was nationwide. There was slavery in New Jersey, New England, mid-Atlantic states, and of course the South. In other words, slavery attaches itself to America as a national institution, not a regional institution, for clarification. The Dutch settled in New Amsterdam, which is now New York State, in the mid-1620s. And via the Dutch West India Company, which is a major trading company of the Dutch, in the mid-1620s began the importation of African people. I would also point out that the Dutch had first colonized Brazil before the Portuguese, and they lost Brazil in the Portuguese War. So the Dutch were a major slave trading nation, although a small colony. And the Dutch colonized areas of what became North Jersey. New Amsterdam actually extended down from New York, I should say New Netherlands, extended down from the state of New York into North Jersey, okay, into Sussex and Warren and Morris counties. And African labor was used to clear forests, build roads, construct homes in New Amsterdam. Along the Hudson Valley, Dutch estates were used to enslave African labor in agricultural pursuits. However, slavery in New Netherlands was a bit different in that the slaves that were in, or African people brought into slavery in New Amsterdam, which became New York City, were owned by the Dutch West India Company. So what we have here is called corporate slavery, okay? Corporate slavery was a bit different from individual ownership. Those enslaved in New Netherlands, and particularly in New Amsterdam, the urban area, practiced or were under the practice of half-time. In other words, they owed the company work And when they finished that work, they were somewhat free to go where they and live their lives, but then the company could call upon them at any time, and they were owned. But it was less odious than what will happen to them once the English come in and take over. The English come in when they defeat Holland, or the Netherlands, in what is called the Anglo-Dutch War of 1664. And then New Netherlands becomes New York, and New Amsterdam becomes New York City, named after the Duke of York. At that point, individual slave ownership comes into place. By individual slave ownership, I mean one is owned by a person or family, as opposed to this corporate type of thing. Okay. Now, I should point out that slavery existed in these northern counties, such as Bergen, Essex, Monmouth, and Middlesex, which formed East Jersey. As slavery grew in this area, we are talking about 10 to 12% of the population as black. New York City had a very large black population of about 20% in 1715. Now, resistance, wherever you find slavery in America, you find resistance. What we find, one of the early examples of that was the New York slave insurrection of 1712. In the what will happen here is there is an attempt to set a small fire to draw authorities to that, to attack them, and thereby get their freedom. It did not work out, of course, and because they were outnumbered, and they will be put on trial and executed. A larger conspiracy in New York is the New York conspiracy of 1741, when a number of fires are set in New York during that particular time, New York City. New York City was, of course, had a number of anxieties. They were afraid that the Spanish might come in, or their enemy to the north, the French, might come in and attack the colony. They were afraid of Indian attacks. They were also afraid of slave rebellion. So there was a tremendous amount of anxiety here when these fires start, because the structures are wooden. So there's a great fear of these of slave rebellions. 20 more slaves in New York City set fire to buildings and lay in wait for them to put out the fire as well, including one at the, shall we say, governmental building there. Laws came into effect to restrict the mobility in the town and to pass laws in which blacks could not congregate after dark, because in an unlit city there was great fear of slave rebellions. Fear increased when Cuffy, a slave seen fleeing from the scene of a fire, shout went up that the Negroes were rising. Attention focused on 2,000 blacks and a few Indians in the city. Based on this testimony of one white female indentured servant, Mary Burton, who was a servant in the tavern of John Hewson, suspicion fell on them since they ran a business in which there was interracial socializing. So she was reluctant to testify, but was threatened with jail and later promised to end her indenture and financial reward if she did. And she pointed to 3 slaves, okay, that were supposedly involved in this conspiracy. The toll 13 blacks were burned at the stake, 16 hung along with 4 whites who were seen as co-conspirators. More than 70 blacks and 7 whites were banished from British North America. Some were sold into slavery in the West Indies. Here you see Judge Daniel Horsemanden, who was the judge-in-chief of the proceedings, and his notes became a record for this. This is important to note because all through colonial America we see these conspiracies to revolt and to seek freedom, okay? I haven't talked about the Stono Rebellion in South Carolina in 1739, but that was another one. But I'm going to move on to the American Revolution. What do we see here? In Newark, we had for a while a parade in honor of this man, Crispus Attucks, who died in the Boston Massacre. He was a person of African and Indian ancestry. He was a sailor in Boston, and he was there protesting along with white colonists, and he was the first to die along with the others that were shot. They're harassing the troops over the TEAC, the Boston TEAC, and also the Stamp Act and other British policies. Casualties, 11 hit, 5 killed. But when taught in high school, Crispus Attucks is often, until very recently, forgotten. And so the question I raised to my class is, did Crispus Attucks have a stake in this? Or was his own death in vain? Here he was, and most of his people discriminated against, he, although a free man, still discriminated against, and most blacks in Boston enslaved. It's throughout. So I'm going to skip ahead a bit to suggest that blacks used the American Revolution as a means of trying to obtain freedom. You will find that blacks fought at Lexington and Concord. There were some free blacks that joined the colonial militia. Blacks were there at Bunker Hill. So we'll talk about, we understand that. And so in the early days, even before the Declaration of Independence in 1775, when these events occurred, we find blacks fighting with some of the colonists. But they were fighting in order to obtain what? Freedom. Okay? For themselves. Now, once the Continental Army is formed in 1775, there was pressure from the southern states, the southern colonies, not yet states, but not to enlist blacks because they did not want black soldiers enlisted. They didn't want to put guns into the hands of slaves, and free blacks, albeit a small population, could not be trusted. So the Continental Army, for a while, about a year, followed a path of what? Exclusion of blacks and non-recruitment. However, its army were made up of farmers, and there were shortages in the army, and therefore they needed to do what? They needed black troops. And so this led to the inclusion of blacks in the military of the American Revolution. Now, what will follow, and I'm going to skip a little bit here. There's Peter Salem, who fought at Bunker Hill, his marker, arms bearer. And I'm going to get here to the final thing. Emancipation occurs in the period following the American Revolution. Pennsylvania passed the Gradual Abolition Act in 1780, Massachusetts in 1783, and the others following the American Revolution. And New Jersey brought up the rear in 1804 as the last state to abolish slavery. The first emancipation comes out of the contradictions in American rhetoric about freedom and the reality of needing black troops. Okay? I should point out that blacks fought on both sides, and that's another long story. But thank you. Any questions?
Or you can combine them at the end if
Yeah,
that's more
that's-
convenient, because we have some dovetailing.
Okay.
There's some complementarity.
Okay.
I feel like a middle generation here. I got to hear some awesome young scholars. I'm excited. I feel like going back and teaching law students again after seeing these young lawyers here. And I get my mentors here as well. So we'll try and hold up the continuity from all the great orators. Just a few things. I know we're trying to keep time here. Again, I'm Professor Carm Regan-Almaner. I'm in the Political Science Department. I'm also in African American Studies. And I'm excited to talk to you about Dr. King and three particular folks who are really important as we look at the 250th anniversary of America. And I'll make it pretty quick. But we want to key in on a few things. So you see here, we're talking about, as you just heard, Crispus Attucks, but we're also talking about Phyllis Wheatley and James Forten. How many folks have heard of any of those three people? How many have heard of two of them? How many have heard of all three? All right, we have few, so that's good. And perhaps you haven't heard of them in the way that we'll talk about them today. So we have here, and we're going to tie it to King, so we'll do all of that in like a few minutes. So when you go to law school, they teach you to think big. All right, so faith, I think, is important here. You see this rendering of Phyllis Wheatley, this amazing African-American woman who is reputed to have come out of the Gambia region of Africa around 8 years old. She is kidnapped, brought to America. She ends up in Boston, as you heard. All 13 colonies were enslavement colonies. And so she's brought in, and she is really quickly learning, as she's in a kind of an interesting situation where she is taught to read, unlike people like Frederick Douglass and others where it was banned generally to read. As part of slavery, she's taught to read. She has a very learned home, a medical professional, et cetera, and she's taught not only to read, but she becomes very fluent in the classics, right? And so she's able to deal with Greek and Roman, and she also becomes a master of classical poetry in the European kind of forms. And so great becomes her reputation that, in fact, it helps to lead to her freedom, where she's granted freedom. She has a quote here: "In every human beast, God has implanted a principle which we call love of freedom. It is impatient of oppression and pants for deliverance." And I labeled this faith because there's subtle kind of mentions here when you see panting for deliverance that are allusions to biblical scripture, right? Like panting after God, like a deer pants for water, that kind of scripture. And this idea of deliverance. And you see this replete within her poetry. If you look at the full passage, she's also making reference directly to Old Testament Egyptians and this idea of seeking freedom, and she's making parallels to African American freedom. All right, so there's this idea of her invoking faith as she implores even George Washington in her poetry, in her letter to him, to include African Americans in the Revolutionary War. She fails in that push, but George Washington is very admiring of her talent, and as you heard earlier, he invites her to come to visit. You also see logic, as she says here, how well the cry for liberty and the reverse disposition for the exercise of oppressive power over others agree. I humbly think it does not require the penetration of a philosopher to determine. So she's making this logical linkage between this revolutionary period against British oppression, and of course the freedom, the manumission of African descended people. She's saying this is the same freedom. So it doesn't take a great leap in philosophy to see that connection. So she's using logic, she's using faith, and we see these connections to King. As King says, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. So we see, again, King making the similar kinds of cross-references of freedom is freedom, right? It's not people-specific. As our young lawyer said earlier, this idea of even seeing in our nomenclature, in our language, our lexicon, we need to be consistent. We also see aspects of selfless courage. This is a connection between Phyllis Wheatley and in her reflection on addicts, who you heard of earlier. On the affray in King Street, by Phyllis Wheatley, on the evening of the 5th of March, this is referring to the Boston Tea Party, Wheatley celebrated the event of the Boston Massacre that led to martyrdom of Crispus Attucks, the black patriot who organized the so-called affray. So you see some of the language here, and I don't know why it got jumbled up, but we're going to get into it, but this is from her poem, which is much more eloquent and beautiful than what happened to this slide. Another connection, this is an artist's rendering of the Boston Massacre there in Crispus Attucks being martyred on the left. And you see in the bottom there Dr. King reflecting on Crispus Attucks. He says, he is one of the most important figures in African American history, not for what he did for his own race, but for what he did for all. So these themes also we see of this selfless courage as we see, and this ties into what you heard from one of our mentors just earlier, this idea that in each American war we have this primary role being played by African American soldiers, right? Not only in the Revolution, where we see them on both sides, right? Where Lord Dunmore proclaims for Britain, we're going to bring in black soldiers and grant them freedom. And then George Washington has to grapple with that. How am I going to compete with that? But we also see that in the Civil War, right? With 200,000 African Americans joining that war and becoming, according to Lincoln, this pivotal force in turning the war towards the Union. So here we see Dr. King reflecting on that selfless courage within Crispus Attucks, and we see Attucks, who's not recorded as having had many words, but one that we do have in record is supposedly he said, "Fire if you dare," before he is killed. And lastly, we have James Forten, who I kind of, in following our discussion of lexicon, I kind of put our own lexicon I created here, this idea of freedomnomics. James Forten becomes this amazing person who's also tied to boats, if you will. There's the boat that takes Phyllis Wheatley. The boat is called the Phyllis, right, which is a slave ship. That's where she gets her name from, and Wheatley is her enslaver's name. And so this boat that kidnaps her, we see there's this Boston Tea Party, this idea of ships at port in the Boston Massacre. And then we see ships also playing a prominent role with James Forten as he becomes this very rich African American through making sales, right? The same way one might say this is a real McCoy, around Elijah McCoy and all his inventions around the train that were second to none. That's the way that James Forten made sales for ships. And so he is there in Philadelphia and he's creating these sales and second to none, and he has this radical workforce that's multiracial, multicultural. He has black and white workers, which is very radical for the time. And not only that, we see him bring in the economics of freedom in a way that we're going to hear from King, in that he dedicates a lot of his earnings to abolitionism, right? It takes money, right? And so he's feeding the abolition with his money, even with its words. The great William Lloyd Garrison, who is in many ways a sponsor at first and then becomes an equal with Frederick Douglass and then becomes a rival in certain ways, but always in tandem. And he is feeding, he's helping, ironically, he's the money behind William Lloyd Garrison, who in turn becomes the support behind Frederick Douglass. So we see this kind of symbiosis, this kind of interconnection that is beyond race, right? that when we talk about freedom, and it's beyond the myopia of just seeing just one thing, one frame, but if we open up the frame and see over history, we see how we're all connected, as King would say. And so we also see, as we mentioned, the ironies of the ship, and we see him even as a young man being a sailor in the Continental Navy and having the Royal Louis taken over by the British, and he survives it. So we see this constant theme of ships here. Some final reflections I would have on my attempt to kind of weave these freedom figures of African American and American history from the freedom period, the revolutionary period, to tie them to King in our brief moment together today. I would just turn to these two quotes from King to close this reflection. One being, the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. Right? And I think we see today that both the arts and the economics, the arts of a Phyllis Wheatley, perhaps, and the economics of a James Fortin are being commandeered for purposes perhaps other than what King would deem moral. Right? We see the forces of government being used and commandeered. Even the ability, for instance, to go on Dr. King Day or on Juneteenth and go to a national park for free, which has been the custom, right, on those days by our current leadership in federal government. Conspicuously, just those 2 days, all of a sudden you cannot go for free anymore on those holidays, right? And then there's much more, of course, long list of substantive changes that we're dealing with right now that I will not go through with you, but I'm sure you're aware of a lot of them. Suffice to say, we live in a time when these figures and their thoughts and their contributions to all of our history are very relevant. So I urge us, as we think about King, to think about him in context, to think about him in the way that the physicist Cheikh Anta Diop called historical continuity, right? These are not just separate figures isolated and siloed off, but they operate within these broad historical sweeps, also consistent with what you heard earlier. And lastly, he says here, nothing in the world, in all the world, is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity. And so we live in a time of particular stupidity, I think it's fair to say. As somebody who's practiced public policy, as somebody who's challenged laws, some successfully, as somebody who I very recently discovered, I am also somebody who has a case that is cited in the U.S. Supreme Court decision in a positive way. I didn't actually realize that for some reason, Dr. Farina, but I did discover that earlier. But this is a particular time of stupidity when science has been rejected around COVID, for instance, and other things, around vaccines, et cetera. It's a time when all of our disciplines are being in some ways subdued in halls of power. To say, no, I have a better way. It is my whim. And so I think that's a fair rendering of what we're dealing with. So I encourage all of us to look to these types of figures as we deal with how do we make this a better society. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Do I have any student questions? I want to give the students a chance if they have any questions on the presentations that we had for panel one. No pressure, just giving you the opportunity. Okay, yes. Great. Don't forget, Jack in the back has some great things for free to give away.
I'm just curious about the Supreme Court case that you mentioned. Sorry, I'm just curious about the Supreme Court case that you mentioned.
Yes. Yes, Sains v. Roe. It's a case that cited my case. I had a case that I worked on when I was a younger lawyer. I practiced law for a number of, almost 2 decades. And one case that I worked on was Sanchez v. Department of Human Services, where we challenged a 2-tier welfare system in New Jersey. And I argued the federal Constitution, Equal Protection Clause, and the right to travel. And my arguments were successful, and we overall were successful, so that law was overturned. I only recently realized that law that we were able to get from the change in that law in New Jersey, which was codified by the legislature afterwards, was also cited by the U.S. Supreme Court, because California had a similar law, two-tier system that punished people who were coming from poorer states into New Jersey. And so the Supreme Court of the United States, long story short, basically agreed with a lot of the kind of arguments that we rendered, and they cited my case in overturning the law nationally. So it was a really good thing.
Thank you so much for that. Any other quick question? We have time for one quick question. All right, great. A student question. I love that.
So this is regarding the colonial history of New York. And I was just wondering how the Seneca Village played a part in your presentation. Like what was happening there with the freed blacks, and how does that like play in?
Oh, Central Park.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know exactly how it plays in. You're talking about what are you referring to specifically?
I know there was like a free black enclave around where Central Park is now, and I was just wondering if you had any insights about that.
Well, there were a number of free black communities in the colonial period. There were a number of free black communities in the colonial period. Let me get over here. There were a number of free black communities that were established in not only New York, but in New Jersey here, Timbuktu and others, on the part of people who wanted to be free, and they were afraid that their freedom might be taken away, so they tended to coalesce and form these communities. Now, their freedom will last after the states pass emancipation laws, and so they are free. Now, in some of these free black communities, such as in South Jersey, they will play a role as stops on the Underground Railroad. So there is a connection between free blacks and those that are enslaved, okay? And also some of those communities will establish churches, and those churches will play a role in terms of aiding those on the Underground Railroad. And they will also develop self-help aspects to that, benevolent societies. So they do play a role in the larger picture. Okay.
No other questions? Thank you to Larry, and thank you to all of you.
Thank you so much. We're just going to take a minute to switch slides, and we're going to go into panel 2. As we switch the slides, if you need to, the restrooms are around the corner. You have to keep going all the way to the corner. 5 minutes, please. We are going to start up very shortly. Thank you so much. All right, everyone, are you having a good day so far? All right, everyone all right? Can I hear from the crowd? We're good, we're good? All right, we like the hot chocolate, the pound cake. I got the pound cake for you special, right? We got the extra hot chocolate. I think we went through that too. But we still have water. I believe we still have coffee. And we got fresh donuts, yes. Gotta have a little carbs to keep us going for the day, okay? So we're going to get started with our second panel. If everyone could just, she should be here soon, right? Yeah. Excellent, excellent.
Good morning, everyone. How y'all doing? How's everyone doing? All right. Well, listen, I'd like to begin by acknowledging and thanking Director Hilton, Dr. Pritchett, Chris, Fernando, and everyone who had a hand in putting this event together. Let's just show them some love. Now, I wasn't surprised that my colleagues gave amazing presentations. That's just what they do. But I have to say that I was, like my colleague, really blown away by the student presentations. And so I just want to say, let's give it up for them one more time. Amazing, just simply amazing. Okay, so I was asked to reflect on the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And I wanted to do so reflecting on the national independence and the freedom of this country, in light of the fact that this is also a nation founded on land theft and genocide of indigenous folk, as well as human trafficking and human bondage of people of African descent. Freedom, death, bondage, theft. There's a tension, right? And so the theme of my presentation is problems and promise. Problems and promise. Now, all nations and empires have a way of exalting themselves, highlighting only their virtues, concealing their faults, and engaging in acts of myth-making. However, as Howard Zinn and others have taught us, a nation's true history can only be revealed via the experiences of those from the margins and on the underside. And so, to that effect, my reflections are going to highlight some voices from the Black freedom struggle to hopefully guide some of our thinking around this issue, around this 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. All right, now, in 1852, the great abolitionist Frederick Douglass was invited to Rochester, New York, to give a commemorative speech on the 4th of July, national independence and freedom. In his oration, Douglass declared that July 4th was not a day to celebrate as far as Black people were concerned, but rather it was a day to mourn. America, on one hand, spoke of liberty, yet the practice of slavery exposed the deep hypocrisy and contradictions within. I'm going to read a passage from his speech so you can hear the power and the insight that Douglass offered that day. He asked, "What to the American slave is the 4th of July?" I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all other days in the year the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty an unholy license, your national greatness swelling vanity. Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless, your shouts of liberty and equality hollow mockery. Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgiving, with all your religious parade and solemnity are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy, a thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. There is not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of these United States at this very hour. Go where you may, search where you will, roam through all the monarchies and despotisms of the old world, travel to South America, search out every abuse, and when you have found the last, lay your facts by the side of the everyday practices of this nation, and you will say with me that for revolting barbarity and shameless hypocrisy, America reigns without rival. That's the great freedom fighter and abolitionist, Frederick Douglass. But this was not simply the opinion of one man. even a man as great as Douglas was. This tension and contradiction was embedded within the very law of the land. 5 years later, in 1857, the Supreme Court decision, Dred v. Sanford, denied black people, Dred Scott v. Sanford, the famous Dred Scott case, denied black people of African descent the rights and privileges of citizenship. The ruling expanded the reach of slavery into free states. It said, we don't care that something may take place in a quote-unquote free state. The laws of the slave states apply there as well. This decision, also of note, did this. It also argued that indeed the Declaration of Independence did not have black people in mind when it was written. In the opinion of Roger B. Taney, who served as the 5th Chief Justice of the U.S., in his opinion, he wrote the following, quote, in the opinion of the court, the legislation of histories of the times and the language used in the Declaration of Independence show that neither the class of persons who have been imported as slaves nor their descendants, whether they had become free or not, were then acknowledged as part of the people, nor intended to be included in the general words used in that memorable instrument. All right? All the beautiful words written, they did not apply to black people. This is what the Supreme Court said in the opinion for the Dred Scott case. Now, as many years have gone on, many consider the Dred Scott decision the worst decision in the history of the Supreme Court. But it is the historical record. Now, over 100 years later, the man we honor today, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., described the egalitarian impulse contained within the Declaration of Independence as being more intent than reality. In his famous 1963 speech that we fondly look at as the I Have a Dream speech, King said that the Declaration of Independence, along with the Constitution of the United States, were a promissory note that the country had actually defaulted on with respect to people of color. I encourage all of you, if you have not read or heard that speech, to do so. It is truly one of the great orations in this country's history. But he described these documents as a promissory note, one that this country had defaulted on with respect to people of color. And yet, despite the limits of this document, its conception, its content, its enactment, the black freedom struggle over the ages has used it as a guiding light for the nation, reminding America of its professed ideals, pointing to the promise of a fully realized democracy, and working hard to someday make it a reality. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men, and today we'd say all women, all siblings, are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There's so much there that can chart our vision and our way towards a more free and just society. And so I think King is saying that despite its limits, it's still worth fighting for. Now, in 1902, the educator and pioneering black feminist, Anna Julia Cooper, penned a speech entitled, quote, "The Ethics of the Negro Question," end quote. And she began this speech by quoting the book of Proverbs, 29th chapter, the 18th verse, which reads as follows: "Where there is no vision, the people perish." And then she continues. She writes, quote, "A nation's greatness is not dependent upon the things it makes and uses. Things without thoughts are mere vulgarities. America can boast her expanse of territory, her gilded domes, her paving stones of silver dollars. But the question of deepest moment in the nation today is its span of the circle of brotherhood, the moral stature of its men and women, the elevation at which it receives its vision into the firmament of eternal truth." I think that in many ways these words hold true today. So as we mark the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, the question before us is this: what will the greatness of this nation consist of? Will it be great due to its rejection of diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts? Will it be great due to its mistreatment of immigrants and refugees? Will it be considered great due to its assaults on the rights and dignities of women, of queer folk, of religious minorities, and others? Will it be considered great due to its imperial ambitions in Venezuela, Greenland, Nigeria, and elsewhere? Will it be considered great due to the mendacity, criminality, and immorality we see on high? Or will it be great due to the health and dignity of its people, those who live here, and their neighbors, their physical safety, their economic security, their access to education, their health care, and so forth? Will this nation be considered great due to its service unto others, especially the least of these, those on the margins of society? Will it be considered great due to its care for what Pope Francis called, quote, our common home, end quote? That is, of course, Mother Earth and the environment. Will this nation be considered great due to its commitment to peace around the world and not its naked interest in oil and fueling the weapons industry? I could go on and on and on. These are the questions and the challenges confronting us in the present and into the future. What will make this nation great? We are going to be the authors of that, and it's up to us. Thank you.
Together.
Okay, awesome.
Hi, everyone. This is a remembered space. I remember the first time you did like a teacher's workshop in this room. I was still the executive director of the Amistad Commission, and I was asked to speak for MLK Day. So this is a wonderful memory, right, to be full circle. I am Dr. Stephanie James Harris. I am the director of the Africana Studies program here at Seton University, and it is my pleasure. I have no idea what I just did. Did I do that wrong? Of course, me and technology, my students know that this is always the question. Oh, there it is right there. And I'm the next one. That was easy. Thank you. Right there. Thank you. Monitors off. There we go.
So then you can just use the key.
Thank you. So, my job today is to think about the reality of teaching resources and to challenge ourselves and question ourselves as both students and practitioners and educators and those that are seeking to be educated in this space, to think about reflectively the reality of the discourse of MLK, and I chose as a point of reference for teaching materials and to think about what resources could be used in the classroom, a juxtaposition with Thomas Jefferson and the drafting of the Declaration of Independence. But my students know I love to tell stories. I love to find little-known stories or facts that could challenge our thinkings and make us think about the depth and breadth of all the possibilities of history. We have a misnomer when we look backwards that history is always inevitable. It never is. And what I love the most about being in a classroom is when students can begin to prophesize and to think about and to imagine all the ways that the things that we have told ourselves are inevitable could have shifted or changed and what that would have meant. If you're designing curriculum, you would say that that was sort of backwards design, right? You have students that would go back through the idea of backwards design. And so in the reflections I want to do today, I've juxtapositioned these two pictures because I'm going to compare the Declaration of Independence and the letter from the Birmingham jail. I'm choosing those two and this image, which is a quilt image by Faith Ringgold. On purpose, because we look at these two philosophers, thinkers, scholars, that shift the discourse for American government, American thought, the reality of the republic, the reality of democratic processes, those two documents that become linchpins for movements. And yet we see one that is able to do that from a space of grandeur, and the same one with the same thoughts, being enshrined in a jail with the same ideologies. How do we arrive at these differentials? So my thought was I wanted to coin this Jefferson to MLK Jr. The United States made a decision, independence first, morality later. Now how do we grapple with that with students? Well, I want us to think about some classroom reflections for the Declaration's journey at its 250th anniversary. I'm going to think about and have students think about analyzing the betrayal of the full promise of freedom and MLK's reclamation towards it. So what do I mean by that? Well, I am a native-born Philadelphian. The city of brotherly love and sisterly affection is my hometown. At 6 years old, I can distinctly remember standing in line with my mother at the 200th anniversary of this nation, waiting in line for the opening of the brand new African American Museum in Philadelphia. The first museum that was operated and financed by a municipality and done as a response to protest for inclusion, an African American inclusion narrative at the 200th commemoration of this nation. It was an oversight. It was the last museum slated for development in Philadelphia. And it seems like just a given now that museum is a part of the ethos when we are in Society Hill and when we're in looking at Independence Mall and we see all these celebrations and all of it, from the President's House to Liberty Bell to the Constitution Hall to Ephraim's Alley to the Afro-American Museum. We think of that as a natural discourse, but it wasn't. It was an oversight and it was left out. And sometimes I think that those purposeful decisions, the ones in which people are fighting for inclusion, become about this grappling, this conversation about the 250th. During the Revolutionary War, General George Washington had these words spoken at every single campfire of the Continental Army because he believed in the collective power they had to stir inspiration and galvanize towards a united mission. He was correct. They did just that throughout the war and forevermore, in a multitude of instances where unification of spirit had to be needed to fight a war against oppression. Let's see if we can get these words up. I got it. Start without data. Let's see if it does it. Maybe we can't. Oh, it's going to make me sign in. Well, might not be able to do that because I don't want to have to sign in. What I was going to show you was actually MLK saying something that I memorized in grade school. So let's see how far I can go. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed with, by their Creator, with certain unalienable rights, among those being life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Martin Luther King included them. I have no idea what I just did. I need some help because I hit the data and now it's not coming back up. Martin Luther King enshrined those in the letter, thank you, letter for Birmingham jail. He also enshrined them in his March on Washington speech. It was purposeful. It was inclusive. It was what Washington had said at the campfires. It is what he dedicated as a part of what he thought was the narrative for the war. Now, these are images from the book of the letter of Birmingham jail and an image of Jefferson actually writing it. I want to tell another story about the Declaration of Independence, one that disappears from history, one that became about negotiations, one that became about erasure, but also could have shifted the discourse, complete discourse of the war. Anybody know about the passages that were erased from the Declaration of Independence? Show of hands. Did anybody know the passages? What were the passages? Do you know what they were? Absolutely. The Declaration of Independence had a 160-word declaration, a second declaration, I will call it. The words that freedom were silenced on July 2nd, 1776. See, it was negotiated out of that document. So the question I always want to ask students, what if the first Declaration of Independence wasn't signed in 1776 without them? What if those most powerful words, the ones condemning enslavement itself, weren't deleted before the world ever saw them? The story of America's birth is legendary, but behind the fireworks, the parades, the patriotic quotes, there is a more secondary declaration, one that could have shifted discourse of history, one that we do not talk about, one that King actualized. A version too dangerous, too divisive, too honest for its time, or was it? A version that echoed the life's work of MLK 2 centuries later. It became the centerpiece of African American political thought for the next 2 centuries, not the way it was applied by the revolutionaries tolerating enslavement, but in its full universal application, an application that has spurred freedom movements across the globe. Let's see if this one plays. Will it let me play it? I had all these cool videos. Let me see if it'll let me come in. It might not let me grab them. It's okay. I don't think they'll let me open them.
Yeah, I think if you go.
See, he's coming in, he's logging in with the data. I don't want to do that. I'm going to keep talking while you do that. There is another story of the Declaration that has disappeared. The one that could have changed not just our revolution, but the entire history of this nation. It was a draft that shook a nation. In June of 1776, Thomas Jefferson sat alone in a rented room in Philadelphia, his scroll scratching against parchment, and the thunder rolled outside with the rain. He had been chosen by the Continental Congress to write the colony's formal Declaration of Independence, a document that would sever America from the one we celebrate today. Hidden deep within it was a passion that condemned one of the most powerful forces in the colonies, the transatlantic slave trade and enslavement. In fiery language, Jefferson wrote that King George had, and I quote, waged cruel war against human nature itself, violating its most sacred rights of life, liberty, in the persons of a distant people who never offended him. He called the slave trade a tyrannical warfare, accusing Britain of keeping open a market where men would be bought and sold. It was one of the most boldest anti-slavery statements ever written by a major political figure in the 18th century. And then it vanished. It was negotiated out. The words that were cut. Jefferson presented his draft to the Continental Congress on July 2nd, and the debate was fierce in that Independence Hall building. You see, delegates from the Deep South, South Carolina and Georgia threatened to walk out, which is ironic because John Lorenz, for those of us who have seen Hamilton 1,012 times like I have, are very familiar with the South Carolina figure that is a part of that wonderful reproduction and musical, who was a fiery abolitionist and was also was a man of sensibilities who had studied in England and was already proposing that African American men should be freed and also be allowed to join in the fight, that there was contradictions in the American narrative, that America could not found itself on these contradictions, could not survive on these contradictions, that they would eventually have to be eradicated out of their history, and that they should not continue in this battle for life and liberty without encompassing everyone. Nevertheless, South Carolina and Georgia rebelled, threatened to walk out. And they had decided, as we see that image of the snake so often, that either they are united together or they fall separate. This is an engraving of the members of the Continental Committee, the Gang of Five, as we talk about in the Congress now, right, that had to think about those particular negotiations. It was Ben Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, Livingston. If you go to King University, his house is behind it. And of course, Thomas Jefferson, Livingston, Franklin, and Lorenz. Other from northern colonies, where ships had grown rich from transporting enslaved people, also objected. The argument was simple and chilling. They decided, independence first. They would deal with the moralities later. They kicked it down the can. And who ended up being the man that we associate with that battle? It's Martin Luther King, more than 2 centuries later. It wasn't a small edit. It was an act of calculated silence. A silence that spoke volumes about the hierarchy of human value that would define the civil rights of a few, and erasure of those same rights to the majority. And the reclamation of the rights would become the foundation for linchpin of the long civil rights movement in this nation. Students must know the complete story. They've got to become familiar with these primary texts, with its messy contradictions, including the contradictions of the drafters, embodied as reflect on 200 years of history with this American experiment, with independence, democracy, representative government, and who it would represent. I'm not even going to try to hit any of these videos, but I'm going to make sure that you all get them, because some of them were really kind of cool, and I got some of them that were actually speaking, and some of them that were parodies, and wanted to make sure that, because I always feel that students we all need things that are engaging and fun and enlightening and that can teach, but also will make things stick in our minds and our thoughts. So in July 1776, despite being the owner of 600 enslaved people, Thomas Jefferson was furious. Now, the image I have for this slide, if any of you have ever been to the African American Museum, anybody been to the African American Museum in Washington, D.C.? When you come out of the first gallery on the first floor and you encounter Thomas Jefferson, what do you see? Anybody remember the exhibition on Jefferson? What is it? Do you remember? The names of the enslaved people. Absolutely. They call him the foundation of a nation. That's called the exhibit. And it's bricks, 600 plus bricks that are all around him. He's holding a scroll, and on each one of those bricks is an enslaved person that he owned, including his own children. But yet, on this date, in July of 1776, he was furious. He had wrote that he had to sacrifice the passage to preserve unity among the colonies. It was a political necessity, perhaps, but a moral tragedy that would echo for generations, the moral tragedy that MLK would dedicate his life dismantling, the moral tragedy that still echoes today. So what has been the cost of the compromise? I want us to imagine if those words had stayed. It's a question I love to ask students, to begin to backwards design the nation, if those words had stayed. It's a question I want us to reflect on as we look at why we're still grappling with those issues and seeing dismantling of civil liberties and civil rights even today. What if those words had stayed? What if America had declared not just independence from Britain, but independence from enslavement and its ideologies within its borders as it created its nation? There would be no 3/5 compromise, no Dred Scott decision, no Civil War spilling brothers' bloods across American soil, none of the civil rights legislations, the Jim Crow laws, the lynching, none of school desegregation, Brown versus Board of Education, no lunch counters. There wouldn't have been a necessity for it. We would have declared from our beginning, our nation's beginning, what King fought for from our beginning. If we could have kept those words, there would have been no 52 ports across this nation that were selling, buying and selling of enslaved people, all the way almost until the Civil War. There would have been no Clotilda. There would have been no necessity for so many of the legislative moves, or civil liberties, or civil protections that had to be encased back into this nation because we chose independence and decided to kick the can down the road for our morality. But history took another path. The founders chose unity over justice, and MLK chose justice over unity. They chose independence over equality, and Martin Luther King reminded us that equality was our independence. And that unspoken decision, that edited line, became one of the most quietest, most consequential turning points in the history of the United States. So I believe. For centuries, most Americans never knew that Jefferson's anti-slavery paragraph even existed. The official printed copies, known as the Dunlap broadsides, had already been distributed. The deleted sections never appeared in public view. It wasn't until years later, when Jefferson's original drafts were rediscovered in the mid-1800s, that historians began to piece together what might have been called America's Second Declaration, the one that could have been. Today, this is actually a draft, the facsimile draft from the Library of Congress of his original words. It wasn't until years later today you see Jefferson's own handwriting crossed out by the ink of compromise, I shall call it. And it forces us to have a haunting question. Did we gain independence, but lose part of our soul as a nation in the process? What did Jefferson really mean? Here's the deeper irony. He owned enslaved people himself. He wrote words that would inspire generations. All men are created equal, while living in a world that denied the equality and equity for hundreds of people on his own estates. He built libraries, and we know him for being the proprietor and the founder of the University of Virginia, while never talking about who built the bookcases that held the books. But others can see something else. Others see a man wrestling with the same moral tensions that defined his generation, the dream of freedom, built on a foundation of bondage. Why don't we teach our students those tensions? Why don't we allow our students to read those documents and grapple with these ideologies? Why do we assume that these things should be tied up in a neat little bow at the end of a lesson? Why not challenge them to think broader, to think deeper, to prophesize a world that we can't imagine, and then start from there? See, Jefferson understood the deep hypocrisy at the heart of the revolution. He wasn't just accusing King George of sin. He was accusing all of them, himself included. And why this still matters. If history teaches us anything, it's this: the words we erase often shape us more than the ones we keep. That lost paragraph reminds us that America's founding wasn't clean or pure. It was messy, conflicted, and very, very human. It challenged us to see our nation not as a finished product, but as the work in progress, one that still is trying to live up to the original promise. Every time we talk about equality, freedom, justice, we're really continuing the conversation that Thomas Jefferson wanted to start in 1776, but couldn't. The conversation that Martin Luther King made a part of our ethos when he stepped off that pulpit at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church and at 6 years old decided that he was going to take on that city for a 378-day boycott. The hidden historical facts most people don't know was it was 160 words long. It was 1/4 of the entire draft of that document. One that we've enshrined, one that I can remember from learning in the 4th grade, and what a differential it would have made if it had condemned enslavement and truly declared us all free. It was the absolute largest section of the entire document, and it was removed from the final version. John Adams supported keeping the anti-slave language, but Benjamin Franklin, ever the pragmatist, agreed that it should be cut to preserve Southern unity. The word property appeared in early drafts where pursuit of happiness now stands, possibly to avoid implying ownership of humans as a right. When Jefferson's draft resurfaced, it shocked historians, because it really does make us think about the question, could the revolution have started with a direct moral reckoning? The debate over the abolition has inspired the abolitionist movement decades later, reformers citing the last paragraph as proof that freedom's full promise had been betrayed. The founding generation used language that sounded universal, but wasn't. All men meant white, male, property-owning citizens. Women, Native Americans, African Americans were excluded from the vision. And yet, the very phrase became the weapon years later, generations later, that we used to demand equality. Frederick Douglass, Abraham Lincoln, Martin Luther King all turned those same words back towards their authors, proving that even an incomplete truth can become a revolution if people refuse to forget it. And that's the enduring magic of the Declaration. It was flawed, it was timeless, incomplete, but infinite. When we talk about the revolution, we think about muskets, redcoats, and freedom. But the real revolution, the one still unfolding, is the moral one. It's the one that we see outside when we see ICE agents. It's the one when we think about the reality of the civil liberties that we are eroding on a day-to-day basis. MLK is often recounted for this quote: "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." He included it in his march on Selma in 1965. He was answering the question, how long will it take for us to see social justice? We went through 19th century anti-slave movements, 20th century civil rights struggles, one of the greatest social movements of American history, and we have yet to still answer that question. How long will it take? And we can answer it intellectually, or we can take it on with direct. King was borrowing from Thomas Aquinas, Frederick Douglass. He was borrowing from many different resources when he quoted that. He was borrowing when he did his letters from the Birmingham jail. He included even the deleted Jefferson passages in that. It was a struggle to make the words on that parchment true for everyone. Deleted passages, this conversation I want students to have, that I wanted to have with you all today, I want you to go back and read them. It's not just about historical curiosity. I want us to think of them as a mirror. It shows us the cost of silence and the danger of compromise when principles are on the line. And maybe that's why I think it still matters today, because in every generation, we find our own version of that choice. Do we speak uncomfortable truths or stay quiet to keep the peace? When Jefferson's quill stopped moving the stormy night in 1776, he had believed he had written something that would outlive them, a declaration of the world's first truly free nation, a promise that would inspire hope for generations and nations to make those same declarations. But we have yet to embody it. Jefferson later writes, "I tremble for my nation when I reflect that God is just." Maybe that's the answer to the question about how long. Maybe we understand the arc of justice. Maybe MLK was on the long lineage of getting us to that space. Maybe it's time that we pass that baton on to our students. And maybe that trembling comes because we all know what's been left unsaid. The erased truth at the heart of America's most sacred document. Thank you.
Can we give a big hand to our two panelists from the second panel? And now it's time for questions. If anyone has questions for either of the two of the second panel.
And I can make sure you guys get all the resources. I have the documents, I have the primary documents, I have the effect videos. I can make sure that that is distributed and you all get them so that you can see them, because I am a person, I am primary sources. Historians do not deal without them, because we're not going to tell you, we're going to show you, and we're going to let you debate it. All right. Go ahead, sir.
Good morning. Thank you both for coming to speak with us. My name is Garrett Weiniger, and I wanted to ask, particularly as in recent times, especially here in the States, we've seen the increasing weaponization of religion in order to create a narrative about history and about our nation that is very divisionary. How can people of faith in particular use their moral grounding in order to help ensure a narrative of equality, justice, and liberty for all?
So I guess I'm going to turn it over to the religious professor.
Oh, okay.
Or I would just say my short answer. And I'll go back to the Council of Nicaea. I think I'm correct, right? We made a decision at the Council of Nicaea that religion would become government and government would become religion. We have meshed the two for so long, sometimes we can't make the differentials. I think sometimes it requires us to discount or dissolve our affiliations with assuming that the moral high ground must also come in government structures. Some morality, most morality, causes us to usurp and to shake up status quos. And yet I think far too long we have equated religious exercise with government structure. And until we can get to the place, I think in this nation right now, we're looking at it right now with the idea of this Christian nationalism, and until we get to the place where we can really separate them and feel good about standing on what is right as opposed to what is governed, we're not going to get there because we see it being adopted. But we have the power to do so. And I think that when we think about the reality of the morality of social justice issues, of the ways in which people are treated, it's almost impossible to look away. So why do we? Have we become so neutered and disconnected that we fail to see the humanity in even acts that the government says are sanctioned?
Thanks for that question. Great answer as well. Wow. I mean, how would I respond? I would say Martin Luther King Jr., Thich Nhat Hanh, Dorothy Day, Archbishop Romero, Malcolm X. The list goes on of people of faith throughout time who, because of their faith principles and the morality that that they have and how that shaped them, have stood up for justice, stood up against oppression, not just for those like themselves directly affected, but also for others as well. And so, understanding that there's a very rich tradition of people of faith who have stood on the right side of history, that have stood up against injustice, stood up and tried to be lights in a world of darkness, identifying with that, right? Using that to validate one's own perspective in the present. That's how we refuse to cede, conversations of faith and religion and morality, to others, right, who would use them for different purposes. So understanding that tradition, and then standing on one's own principles, right? We all have choices to make. We all have our own integrity to try and stand on. We all have the things that guide us in life, whether they come from religious origins or not, right? We all have to make choices about who we're going to be in society, right? And so, speaking as someone of faith, I know for me, certainly my faith stands at the center of who I am, and it gives me strength, it gives me direction, it gives me encouragement. It inspires me, right? It gives me, perhaps most importantly, that sense of hope, that even in the darkest of times, even in the face of evil and suffering, that there's light, on the other side, that it can be attained. As a Christian, for me, that's seen in the horrors of Good Friday, right? And then the hope and the liberation is found 2 days later on Easter Sunday, right? For other folks of faith, they have their own sources. And again, belief can expand even beyond faith. So even folks who may not necessarily identify as someone of faith and come from secular orientations, they still have things that they can draw from as well, right? So that would be my jumbled answer to your question. I hope it's helpful.
I love that answer. As a seminarian who, following the footsteps of many, but Reverend Pritchett, hope to be a reverend one day, soon. Not soon, but soon. I agree with that. I would say it's not only important to speak from a place of your faith with kindness and generosity and all of those good traits that you find in all of the faiths, but also act in those same ways. You cannot talk one way and then act another. If I do not act, if I'm not kind to you, if I'm not walking with grace and generosity and all of those things that all of the faiths profess to have, then it's not a truth. So it has to be that you're aligned with, your principles, how you speak, and also how you act. And I think that's where some of the disconnect comes from sometimes. We have time for one more quick question. I have a student question. All right. Quick question, quick answer. We're good? All right.
Yep. I just want to thank you for coming here today. And one thing that I'd like to hear your input on is how we can combat this sort of movement by those that are in power right now to erase our history, especially with programs that they're creating, such as PragerU, that is pushing the kind of euphemism of slavery and push the narrative that slavery was not as harsh and inhumane as it was. I just want to know how we can better combat that narrative and ensure that our history is told.
Quick question and a quick answer. That's a deep, long, but try to summarize that.
Child, you have just recounted my daily prayer. My whole life, I think those that were in Africana studies, our whole life has been based on telling truth, speaking truth to power, making sure there was inclusive stories. And you know when you've done it right, when you see so much push to make it erased. right? So you know that we have spent years, and this is a long struggle. The people have been telling the stories, recounting the histories, writing the books for hundreds of years. This is not a new occurrence. You know, the first recounting books in regards even of Afro-American history, I think the first textbook that recounted the historical narrative was like in 1862 or 63, right? So this is not a new fight. What is current right now is the ways in which we're seeing such an incredible pushback about the erasure of even the resources, right? Even in attempting to try to pull these narratives, I was shocked that I could not even find some of the primary sources. We had never been a space in which they were not even available. So we're seeing such a complete erasure because we understand the idea, we understand the magnitude of its exposure, that it will cause us to question. And when you have a society that has decided that they do not want anything questioned, the inclusive story should not harm anyone. It should enlighten us all. And it actually should make us proud about the journeys we have. None of us were there. We're all inheritors of that histories. Whichever way we fall in whatever scope, demographic, religion, whatever, we're all inheritors of it. Our challenge is to change it. But if we're not even confronted and able to see it, then we have no idea what we're grappling with. And I think that has been the most insidious space. So what I think we need to do is we need to be very cognizant about recounting the stories, very cognizant about being purposeful about visiting the spaces, supporting the movements, making sure the museum exhibits still exist, documenting them, creating facsimiles, buying the books, y'all. Like, there are books on my bookshelves that I've had on my bookshelves for 40 years. And they weren't rented on purpose because I wanted them, because I need my kids, my grandkids to still see the documents. They might go out of print. And if we don't start being cognizant of that possibility, we're gonna find that we might not find them in Barnes and Nobles anymore. Amazon might go out of stock. They might become so rare that we can't afford them. And we can't afford for our history to do that. So I think it incumbents upon all of us to be very cognizant, but also, I will say, as a push also for the Afro-American Studies program, I think far too little of us think that this is something ancillary to their other studies. And the courses that are there, the knowledges that are there will round you out, will give you a different perspective. Take the classes, find the room, see what interests you. Challenge yourself to learn the histories, the differentials in narratives. It is not siloed. We are not siloed. So we can't afford to not support the opportunities for intellectual discourse that are afforded in spaces where they're still in existence. We've got to support those spaces.
So we are very distinguished and honored today to have a special guest who fights for our political freedoms on a daily basis, and that is Lieutenant Governor and Secretary of State for the state of New Jersey, Ms. Taisha Way. Perhaps foremost amongst Ms. Way's responsibilities is defending free and fair elections in the state of New Jersey. She also does a lot for families and for women, and not least of which is to raise 4 daughters. So, without further ado, Ms. Taisha Way.
Well, happy MLK Day, all. Come on now, I know it's the end of the program, but I do want to just quickly lift up Stephanie, you mentioned history, and I know the one thing that I made certain of, one of my portfolios that I oversee is travel and tourism. And so I wanted to ensure that Black heritage tourism, right, was part of the space, not just the shore, not just the farms we may have in our state. And I say this because now there's going to be about 50 sites that cannot be erased, especially, and I appreciate that question, for the world to realize that the first African American male, Mr. Thomas Mundy Peterson, to cast a ballot is from Perth Amboy, New Jersey. So that's what we should be doing. And it is a mighty afternoon, I should say. And I am grateful to join each and every one of you. And this is my last full day serving the great residents of New Jersey as your Lieutenant Governor and Secretary of State. So I am thankful to be with each and every one of you. And for the past 8 years as Secretary of State, I have had the distinct honor of overseeing the New Jersey Martin Luther King Jr. Commemorative Commission. Now, the MLK Commission works throughout the year to keep his legacy alive in both words and action. They offer scholarships and help support programming like ones today. The commission is also housed within the Governor's Office of Volunteerism, which itself furthers Dr. King's legacy, helping to facilitate community building, supporting more than 1 million of our residents who volunteer. And it is all about giving of ourselves, right? Reaching out a hand of friendship in support of a neighbor who is in need. This is a way to put Dr. King's life work into action. Now, as we celebrate this day, I always recall his launching of the Poor People's Campaign, right? To confront the deeper roots of injustice in America. We're talking about poverty, economic inequality, and lack of opportunity. MLK believed that civil rights meant more than legal equality. It required fair wages, decent housing, and dignity for all, regardless of where you come from or who you are. Through his campaign, King challenged the nation to live up to its moral responsibility to care for the most vulnerable citizens. And for me, as a mom of 4 girls who often think I only graduated from kindergarten, I do recall his belief in the power of youth. Martin Luther King knew that real change required courage, and throughout the civil rights movement, it was students and young adults who marched, who organized, and put themselves in the line for justice. He saw our youth as leaders of the day, capable of shaping history through conviction, discipline, and moral clarity. Before I close, I just want to show some love to your dean, show him some love, to Ms. Hilton, to all of the organizers. You have been good to be part of this commemorative day of service. And I do want to further close by just noting all, thank you for being here, because we truly are at a precipice. And I do recognize it has been hard, especially for our young people. This doesn't feel like the world you were promised. You are nonetheless showing up, and I am so proud to witness that you are seeking a better society. I admire all of you for being of service to one another and for carrying it forward. You are choosing service over silence, and of course, justice over complacency. So thank you for honoring Dr. King. God bless each and every one of you, and onward. And my onward is calling forth Reverend Pritchett to also receive a special proclamation, and if I may be so privileged, It's short, y'all, okay? It's short. I'm winding this up here. Whereas Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. devoted his life to seeking justice and racial harmony, embodying the ideals of freedom, equality, and justice that form the foundation of our nation. And whereas Dr. King's steadfastness and leadership during challenging times led to significant historical changes through his social justice efforts, inspiring the nation and the world to adopt nonviolence, empathy, and collaboration in overcoming bias and discrimination. And whereas communities throughout New Jersey, encompassing various backgrounds and faiths, will come together to honor Dr. King's legacy and the accomplishments of the civil rights movement. And whereas to recognize Dr. King's lasting influence, residents are encouraged to commemorate his day by taking part in the Martin Luther King Jr. Commemorative Commission's annual King Day celebration and engaging in community service activities. And whereas Dr. King said, everybody can be great because anybody can serve. You don't have to have a college degree to serve. You don't have to make your subject and verb agree to serve. You only need a heart full of grace, a soul generated by love. Now, therefore, I, Philip D. Murphy, Governor of the State of New Jersey, do hereby proclaim January 19, 2026 as Martin Luther King Jr. Day, signed by our Governor and yours truly. Remember, this is my last day, y'all. I'm making this the best day ever. So thank you so much, Dr. Pritchett.
Thank you.
Yeah, who's going to take the picture?
Anybody want to come up and grab a? We'll step.
Okay.
Okay.
That's okay.
How about photo editing?
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
By the way, anybody can be great because everybody can serve buttons. Those brown buttons are on the table. We may have a few more if you didn't get one earlier. I'm now going to ask Ms. Ghana Hilton to come up. When you admit it, we're going to segue to a community service activity. And just give us, everybody take a little moment. Yeah, one sec, come here right down.
Thank you for allowing us that moment. She has other stops to make. Can we give the Lieutenant Governor another hand for coming by? Thank you so much. We appreciate it. So we are down to two very important things. We're going to do our service project in the back. Izzy, can you hold your hand up? All right. So we are making bags that Dove is going to distribute to those who are unhoused or in need. Izzy will help you to make those bags. Our goal is to make 100 of them. It should be easy to do that. And we have plenty of bags. There's going to be like 2 bags with all the products that go in. So she's going to lead that. And we also have our closing remarks from Reverend Dr. Pritchett. All right, so you got something, you got a slide to go up? All right, so while you're getting that slide up, all right, okay, well, there we go, we got it. So you can go up, you want to go up there? Or you want to, yeah. All right, now we good on time. All right.
Unaccustomed as I am to public speaking, that's my joke for today. No, I'll make this a simple seed that I'll pass along to all of you. instead of being loquacious. I'm looking forward to being invited to Washington or anywhere nearby so I can deliver this as a sermon. But it comes down to one sentence. I will often tell my students, every textbook in that bookstore or that you can download digitally will have to be revised in time. There's only one book many of us know that was written thousands of years ago that will never have to be revised because the word is eternal. And that word for us today in one word is, for what should it profit any man or woman that you gain the entire world and its earthly riches, but you lose your soul in the process? That is my word, my final word for today. Thank you. Amen. Go forward and be the peacemakers that God is determining us to be.